morning and welcome to our breakfast session. These breakfast sessions are run by Wise Sussex with the support of Plus Accounting and really are in a response to members' needs or successes that we want to showcase. And at the moment, we're running a series of breakfast sessions looking at remote working, which is obviously a very hot topic at the moment. We've already run a session looking at do you still need an office? And we ran a session on the infrastructure for remote working, and I'll send out links to both of those videos. And today we're going to speak with Jo from Posture People about creating healthy home working spaces. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rebecca Groves, and I am the Skills and Talent Strategy Manager at Wise Sussex. And that means I work with a lot of our members to understand their challenges and successes around attracting, training and retaining talent. And obviously, a key to retaining talent is making sure that people feel happy and healthy and supported in their working. So I think today's topic is really key and timely. So a big thank you to Jo for joining us. Also, I meant to point out that we are filming this morning's event. So if you don't want to be filmed, feel free to pop yourself to your video off. But if you want to leave your video on, it's obviously lovely to see your faces. And as I said, there's an opportunity to ask questions. So if you do have any questions you'd like to ask, then feel free to pop them in the chat function, which is in the top right sort of bar on the screen, just next to the clock. Brilliant. So I'd like to say good morning to Jo. Good morning, Jo. Would you like to tell everyone a little bit about Posture People, first of all, perhaps?
Yes, certainly. My name is Jo Blood. I run a company called Posture People. So I'm going to presume, I know I've seen a couple of faces and a couple of names I recognise, but just to give everybody a recap, we're essentially an ergonomic assessment and product supplier. So we help companies with either individuals or their whole company if they're having problems with their workstations. So we come in and provide people with advice on how to sit correctly, how to do standing up working correctly. And we also look at individuals that are having problems at the workstation. So if people are having backache, neckache, RSI, we come in and be able to provide just both the assessment to find out what's going wrong, and then also the products to help it afterwards. So one of the main things that we've been doing through this whole process is there's obviously been this huge sort of shift to home working very, very quickly in some circumstances. And not everybody is quite so sort of up to speed. I think we've all got the desks and the chairs provided in the office, but then we sort of moved into environments that weren't set up for working really. And it's been providing a lot of advice to people as to how they can use equipment around the house to try and set themselves up properly. And then also now, that was sort of in the early stages, and in the latter stages where more people are saying, actually, this is going to be a long-term thing for us, actually moving into a slightly more kind of formal arrangement. So taking the same workstation regulations that you have in the office and then helping people apply them to the home as well, because there has definitely been a shift by the health and safety executive to say, right, we are no longer in this kind of temporary phase. If people are now thinking about doing this long term, the same DSE regulations, the display screen equipment regulations that applied in the office, need to be applied to the home environment as well. And so it's just making sure that people are aware of that in companies and saying, right, well, how can we practically get that out to home workers? So yes, that's what we've been doing a lot over the last couple of months.
And if people aren't aware of what those regulations are you able to sort of give an overview or signpost people to where they can find those regulations?
Yes, certainly. Emily, who is under the Posture People logo on this call, she's going to be posting various links to us. So we've got an awful lot of advice in our blog. The very basic regulations are people need to sit at some kind of desk or table. People need to sit at a chair with a 5-star base. That chair needs to have an element of adjustability to it. And if you're using a laptop, you need to have the screen up and be using a separate keyboard and a separate mouse. Emily's just popped in the links there, a link to everything you need to know about DSE. So if you're not quite aware of what the regulations are, I'd really advise that you actually go through and just have a read through it. And if there's anything that's not clear, one of the things I like to say is that we're a really friendly bunch. You can give me a phone call and I can talk you through some of the points if you're not quite sure. So
thank you. As we're talking, I'm really aware of how I'm sat to make sure that my posture is correct. And but I was just thinking, when you were talking about those regulations, I think quite often regulations can feel like a box tick sometimes. But I know I was speaking with Emily about actually, the importance of this for business productivity as well. So it's not just about, obviously every company wants to support their employees, but there is a business case for it as well because of the loss of productivity around people not being set up properly. Yeah. So I think that's really important to consider as well is, it's obviously we want to support employees, but also the investment in making sure that you've got these workspaces means that your employees can be more productive, can be more focused on their work, and obviously be sort of healthier in their work as well.
Yes. A really good analogy that we use is you wouldn't supply your members of staff with an out-of-date computer because that would slow them down. And so actually, if you think about it, if they haven't got the right equipment to be able to sort of sit properly and actually be productive, then actually that's going to slow them down. And anything that you can do to sort of tweak that and enable better productivity is going to be a good thing, really. So.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm aware of the irony of my 2-year-old running in to grab his dinosaur as we were talking about productivity, but
I think that's the really nice thing at the moment is everybody's really used to those interruptions now and we will just carry on, don't we? So
he is now armed with dinosaurs and I don't think we'll be disturbing us again, so we can continue. So if people want to sort of think about assessments in the home, are there sort of tools that people can use to do these assessments? Because I know sort of pre-lockdown, a lot of people, if they wanted to work from home, would perhaps do a home visit or would do some kind of assessment to make sure that their employees did have the suitable things at home. Yeah. How does that work now? Because obviously we can't go into every employee's house.
So a rough kind of guidance is, so under the Health and Safety Executive, every company that has more than 5 members of staff should have a written DSE assessment. So that's a display screen equipment assessment. So and even if you've got under 5 people, it's often quite a good idea to still go through the same process. Now, essentially what that is obviously most people are doing it within the office environment, but now you've got people working at home. So really you should have 2, one for the office environment if people are still coming into the office, and also one for the home. Now, there's several ways you can do that. You can download a free paper version from the Health and Safety Executive website, but it is about 12 pages long. And obviously you need to then print it out and store it somewhere. So we've created an online version of it, which is 99p, which you can just download. You can buy a license from our website, and then you can actually just send that out to people and ask them to send you the reports back. And what you're really looking for is to go through these reports and just look to see where you've got the flags. So on our one, it flags up in red if there's something that you need to look at a little bit harder. If you've got, I would say if you've got more than about 20, 25 people, you might want to think about a managed system. So this is something where it will take a lot of the kind of pain out for you. So you just put your employees' email addresses in, and then it'll send out the reports and it'll compile reports for you to show which people need help or which people don't. So it's really thinking about how much time you've got to manage the process and how many people you've got. So I would say the smaller numbers, you probably want to look at the more cost-effective option. If you've got larger numbers, I would say it's probably worth the time time saving to look at some kind of management system. And then you're looking at about £12 per person, and that decreases as you have more people. So there are lots and lots of options out there, but the most important thing to do is record it. It acts as a if you like it is a little bit of a tick box exercise in the fact that you are then recording what somebody's home working situation, what their office situation is, and then you can actually make an action plan to actually say, right, these are the steps we need to do to improve it. Now, if the employee decides that they don't want that in their home, you've gone through the process of documenting it, so that if that employee in sort of 2-3 years time goes, oh, actually I've really damaged my back working at home, you can say, well, here's your workstation assessment, you denied all the help that we offered you. And it is that it's the covering you as a company to make sure that you've done the due process as well, which means that if there's any comeback in the future, you've got all your paperwork lined up, really.
That's really, I think, a really important point to make. But I think what was in my mind when we were talking is, I think before this, you and I were saying about that fear factor of people filling out some of these forms as well, and wanting to not be seen as a squeaky wheel. Maybe that's the wrong term to use when talking about office furniture. But I think a lot of that comes down to culture as well. People feeling able to talk about these things. So, is there any advice on sort of how you can make people feel like they're not being a sort of a nuisance talking about these things?
Yeah, I think a lot of it does come down to culture. So, of our earlier conversation, one of the things we discussed was at the beginning of this process, a lot of people were saying, oh, I've got an achy shoulder, or I've got an achy arm, and complaints are starting to tail off. And one of the things I'm slightly concerned about is that people don't want to sort of stick their hand up to say they're still having a problem, because I think they're worried about the possibility of redundancies and the possibility of the fact that if they're seen to be the awkward customer, then they might be the person that gets sort of put into the awkward customer pot. So I think a lot of it is about talking honestly with people and saying, actually, we want to make sure you're set up at home. It doesn't have to cost a fortune. And so some of the things we can talk about next is sort of cheaper tricks that you can kind of use to actually kind of keep some of the costs down. And it's a really difficult one, because I think by the fact of actually saying to people, we're going to do an audit, we're going to do a workstation assessment of how you're working at home, that starts to open up these conversations, and you can then find out if somebody is really struggling with their home setup, and then you can either say, okay, right, well, they're the members of staff that need to be prioritised to come back into the office, or we need to look at how we can get them set up properly at home. Your most expensive assets in your company are your staff, so you don't want anything stopping them from working as hard as they could. And a lot of this is about actually making them more productive, whichever working environment they're in.
I think that's really well put. And when you were, I think when you were talking about those different sort of cost-effective ways of doing things, we were saying before about, I think sometimes this is something that large companies consider, but at Wide Sussex, we've got companies of all ranges of sizes. And I think no matter how big or small a company, or how much cash flow they have or not, the commonality is that everyone wants to do best by their employees. So I think if you do have any advice that you could perhaps share on maybe some simple tips that people could do initially, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, not a problem. So one of the things we say is to people is to have a look around at what can already be used in the home. So actually things like kitchen tables and dining room tables make great desks in most cases. But what you have to remember is that they tend to be higher than a standard office desk. So actually, can the person sit at the right height? And people might need a footrest with it. And so you can use like temporary books or reams of paper as temporary footrests. If somebody is working on a kitchen chair at home, you want to think about, can you raise them up to the right height? So then you can use sitting wedges, or you can use cushions to actually prop people up. It could be that actually you've got a whole office of furniture, could you actually say, well, let's get some of that furniture. If we are not going back into the office for 3 months, let's take some of that furniture and let's get that out to people in their homes if they want it. So I think it's looking and saying, right, how much longer are we going to be working at home, and how much longer are we going to try and get people back into the office? And then deciding, right, well, okay, we're only going to have half the people back in the office, so we are now going to try, and we've got 50% of office furniture to be able to divvy out to people at home. And it's sort of working like that. I've got a feeling, I've just seen a question pop up to say that somebody has actually now got a hybrid office. And so you almost need them to double up with equipment. And that is one of the problems that we are finding with people, is the fact that they're suddenly kind of going, actually, we need 2 scenarios where they need an office chair at home and also one in the office. Yes, I'm afraid that is one of the downsides. One of the things you could look at doing is, rather than sort of having one large capex, you could actually use leasing, so that you could actually bring the costs right down to a more manageable amount each month, to actually say, right, okay, we're going to invest in some more office chairs at home. They don't necessarily need to be all the singing and dancing ones, but they just need to be something that's of a good quality, that you know is going to last in people's home offices. And then actually, again, prioritise, do your workstation assessments so you can identify the people with problems, and maybe they need a slightly different solution to somebody that goes, actually, I'm fine, I've got the kit at home, I'm working well. I think knowledge is power. It's actually knowing what's happening in people's homes and then working out what you need to do. And I often find that once you know that, the problem isn't quite as scary or as daunting as you think it's going to be, but it's knowing the situation in the first place.
And I think what you were saying as well earlier about sort of using what you have in the home is also, I think, you know, specifically for, well, not specifically, but I guess there's a lot of employees in Brighton who live in very small flats, you know, and maybe wouldn't have the space to have a whole office set up. Or if they had a whole office set up, then it would be around all the time and they would never feel like they're sort of leaving the office. So I think that idea of being able to have multifunctional spaces is not only potentially around sort of cash flow, but also around logistics of living in a city where space is at a premium. So I think, there's some really good options there, and I hadn't realised that you could actually lease the furniture. So I think the idea of that, and we're going to cover that in a sort of a future session, is looking at cash flow around remote working and sort of the financial implications. So I think that's maybe something we could pick up in there as well. So thank you.
I think that's quite a good idea for people, because it does make it really quite cost effective for people. So, and I'm more than aware than anyone, we're in a similar situation to everybody, I think, where you suddenly start looking, kind of going, actually, how do we make sure that we've got enough cash? And so a part of it is actually saying, right, let's actually make sure that we conserve cash flow, so that we're actually sort of being careful with it. And leasing's a brilliant way of doing that. So
thank you. I just saw another question from Sally, who had said, can you recommend a managed system?
Yeah, so I think Emily's just put a link below, but effectively the system that we use and like is called Ergo Pro. It's just, I like it. It's a fairly local company. We've always found that it offers an element of training on top of just the management. So if somebody says, actually, I'm having a problem here, they've got a series of guides that get emailed to them. So there's an element of the individual having to do something to help themselves. So it's not all just down to the employer. Some of it is down to bad habits on the employee's side. And so they do an element of sort of coaching within the system, but that's the one that we recommend. And if anybody wants a demo, then we can arrange for demos, and you can actually set people up and have 5 free licenses so people can play around with it.
Brilliant. I'm aware that I've just spoken an awful lot and asked you a huge amount of questions. I wondered if there's any other questions from anyone in attendance, or any other thoughts that anyone had.
Oh, actually, Sally's got a really good question. Actually, she says, if someone's choice to work from home, is the business obliged to pay for furniture? This one is a really tricky one. There have been no test cases at the moment. The rule previously was no. If somebody chose to work at home, then the employer was not obliged to pay for that furniture. The situation is slightly different now, obviously, because a lot of the employers are asking people to work at home. And so therefore, there probably is an argument to say that actually, yes, the employer does need to pay for equipment at home. As I said, there have been no test cases on it. So there's no, I can't sit here and say categorically it's 100% the employer's responsibility. But what the feeling in the health and safety community is, the first time one of these cases comes before a judge, the judge is going to say, right, there's the employer or the employee, and 9 times out of 10, they rule in the favour of the employee against the big bad company. So that's something maybe just to consider. So, okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions or?
We've got one saying it was more just to find out really a kind of overview as to what other people are doing. Are they all working from home, or have you got a mixture of some people coming back into the office, some people working at home? So to get a kind of indication of that really. So
I can give you.
Okay.
We are almost all working at home, so it's a digital agency. We do have quite a large studio for the amount of people, so we're in the process of junking a lot of stuff to make it as easy as possible for people to come in, because mostly the main reason we want to do that is more of an escape hatch for people. So we're not going to be asking people to come back. It's more for what Rebecca was talking about earlier around not everyone being lucky enough to have a room that they can dedicate to an office. So some of my colleagues are in one-bed flats, or some of them are taking care of other people and they just need to get away, things like that. So we're basically turning it into something akin to or something where people can book a desk and they'll have all the stuff they need to clean up as they go along after themselves, and along, on top of our usual, cleaners that come in.
Yeah.
So, but there's no fully, and we're talking about whether or not we need that office or an even bigger office. It's kind of, we're going to go through the next 3 months and see how many people actually use the office and see what happens.
Yeah. See, I think that's really common, actually, and that's what we're finding with a lot of customers. They're sort of saying, actually, we've said to most people, work from home if you can do, and then if you need to come into the office, then book a desk. I don't know how many of you guys use Breathe HR, but Breathe HR have got a really good way of being able to book desk spaces, because I think that's going to be one of the issues. You don't necessarily want to have one person that ends up having to be really responsible for sort of booking in the desk spaces and stuff like that. So, and I think that's the way a lot of companies will manage this. It tends to be the younger the staff member, the less likely they will be to have the space to have some kind of home office, really, or they're in some kind of shared accommodation. And it's those ones that probably need the ability to come back into the office fairly regularly. So yeah, that sounds like a very sound, sensible plan, really. So
yeah, we'll find out soon enough.
I'll
let you know.
Yeah, be interesting to see how it goes.
And it seems to be that sort of hybrid model from the other sort of people on the call seems to be quite common. So sort of having the option to go into the office or work from home. So it's interesting that Breathe do that bookable system. So that's
I'd recommend that. The other thing that, funny enough, I was just thinking that we've seen an awful lot of is obviously the laptop has suddenly, everybody's got a laptop now. And I've lost count of the number of home assessments that we've been doing where people have got the laptop flat on the kind of desk or kitchen table. And really, I would say as a very minimum for your staff, even if you do nothing else for them, they should have a laptop stand, they should have a keyboard, and they should have a separate mouse. So it just gets the screen higher up, and so that you're not looking down the whole time. And I think those are the kind of fundamentals, really, that if you've got a laptop, make sure you supply the whole kit, and use the keyboards and mice from the office. They can use books underneath to actually act as a kind of temporary laptop stand. The laptop stands that fold and put away are great for people that actually want to pack their office away at the end of the day. And I think we've seen a really big kind of need for that. I think people now want to actually just put everything away at the end of the day, so you have that break between home and work life. I'm really lucky I've got a home office, but I know the vast majority of people out there are sort of trying to work in kids' bedrooms and stuff like that, and it's finding stuff that can fold and put away so that you can actually have it as a home and a kind of family house again, really.
I think that's a really I think that sort of that idea of the minimum sort of thing, and as you say, laptops are just I find really tricky for working on, because as you say, it's all about the neck, isn't it? And just I look back on the video call last time, and I normally do the stacking of the books, and I found it quite interesting at the start of lockdown, sort of gauging which books sort of which
perfect height.
My eyesight. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I don't know if there's any more questions, but I just wanted to quickly flag that when we were talking about this, I was thinking about a talk that we had at our Skills Summit a couple of years ago around the Access to Work scheme that the government run. So there's grants that people can apply for if they need additional resources to enable them to work. And I was having a look this morning quickly, and that grant has been updated in accordance with working from home. So I'll, in the follow-up to this event, I'll also send an email with a link to that video and a link to the Access to Work information on the government website, so that you've got all that up-to-date information, as well as all of these links that Emily's kindly shared as we've been talking. So we've only got 2 minutes left, and I'm always very keen to wrap up on time. So if there's nothing else, then I will thank Jo so much for, in 30 minutes, filling my sheet with so many tips and advice that we can share out with our members. So a huge thanks to Jo and to Posture People. As always, a massive thanks to Vicky and Plus Accounting for sponsoring these breakfast sessions. We could not run them without you, so it's really appreciated.